Welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Brightman. Welcoming in David Anderson to preview Rutgers Norfolk State this Saturday, September 13th, 3:30 kickoff at SHI Stadium. Aaron live on BTN. Rutgers now 2-0, coming off a 45-17 win against Miami of Ohio last week. Obviously, the offense looking good once again. Defense continuing to struggle at times, giving up a ton of big plays. David, just let's start with the defense. Overall impressions from game two. We talked about, teams making big leaps from game one to game two. We kind of downplayed that part, but we were hoping for some progress in the defense. Overall, I think they were better, but they did give up a lot of big plays in this game. How worrisome is that to you entering as this team progresses now? Not necessarily against Norfolk State, but just moving forward overall.
It's pretty worrisome, especially when there's certain teams on the schedule that, like in Iowa, if you can just force them to execute 10, 12 play drives, they're going to make mistakes. They're not like a high-powered offense. But if you let them get big chunks of yards with a big play, 30 yards, 35 yards, then that A is going to give them momentum, and B is going to really shorten the amount of times they're going to need to execute to be able to get points. So that's probably the most concerning thing coming out of that Miami of Ohio game. On the flip side, when Rutgers was not giving up big plays, they were actually pretty solid. The majority of the plays they did cut down much better than the week before against Ohio, whereas it felt like the Bobcats were getting big plays. They were getting medium duration plays. They were getting short, gains on 1st and 10. They might get 3-4 yards. So I felt like Rutgers was doing better on a down-to-down basis, but they still were giving up a lot of way too many big plays, I should say.
Yeah, and I think the concern is that if they're giving up, 2 60-plus yard passes to Miami of Ohio, what does that mean when they face an Oregon or, even Washington or in Big Ten play? Like you said, even Iowa, that's how you're going to lose to Iowa, is giving them big chunks of yardage up in those games. I think also just in terms of the way the offense was functioning, I thought it was very interesting. We talked about it after game one, but Rutgers was very pass first in that first half, but it was very much ball controlled in terms of how they were passing, a lot of 5 to 10 yard routes. They weren't really throwing downfield much at all in this game. And it was interesting to see the offense control the game, but in a different way than they have in years past. But where that kind of almost bit them was how, the defense did give up big plays, Miami of Ohio, early on. If it wasn't for that interception that thwarted the Redhawks getting into the Rutgers red zone, it could have been a tie game at that point late in the second quarter. So I guess your thoughts on just the offensive strategy moving forward, how giving up big plays could impact, the strategy of both Shiano and Shiraka and how they operate, and how much you think that moving forward, the offense might have to change their thinking and how they approach things based on the defensive play.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems like they're trying to run more of like a 6-minute offense where they both try to score and take time off the clock. And so far they've been playing opponents who can't stop them, right? I mean, and Miami of Ohio was playing right into that because, as you and several other people noted, they're keeping their corners 15 yards off the line. And even Chuck Martin, I think you pointed out in his press conference, basically was saying we were just hoping they wouldn't just keep doing it, because like that was basically the game plan, was hope that Rutgers runs maybe up the middle, maybe you stop them for a loss, and then you end up in a third down situation where you can bring some sort of creative blitz package or something and get lucky. But if they're just hammering you with those 10-yard routes, the outside over and over and over again, like they couldn't stop it. And they knew if they tried to stop it, that Rutgers could either then have more ability to run in the middle or throw downfield. So he's not stupid, and I think that, the key, though, is against better teams, they might not be as susceptible to that. Let's call it what you would call like your 6-minute offense, where you're really trying to milk clock. If you can do more than 6 minutes, great, but you're just trying to get points, but also kill some clock. I also think, you're not trying to necessarily go no huddle 2-minute offense, like 2-minute drill, which now they can do in like 1 minute, as we've seen. Mm-hmm. But you also have something that's more of like your 4-minute offense, where you're basically trying to not have incompletions because you want the clock to keep running. But if they're going to give you a deeper throw, you take it, right? So I don't know how exactly Rutgers designs their offense to do that, but basically they're going to have to continue to take what the defenses give them, especially as they start playing tougher defenses. But I would be concerned if they try to be too much like last year, where they just run into the line, run into the line, run into the line, or the opposite, where, if you're trying too many deep shots, like that can be detrimental as well. Like you want to try to mix it up and keep them off balance, which I felt like they were able to do against Miami of Ohio, just like they did the week prior. So hopefully we can see them do more of what they were doing and go from there. I mean, there's a couple minor things to clean up, right? There were still more drops that didn't hurt in this game for the most part. And then the same thing with Athan. He had that sack where he just kept running backwards. Just like we said, don't do that. He has to step up in the pocket, trust his line, and he still was making that same mistake. I think it put them out of field goal range on one, and then they ended up getting lucky. So, like, if you talk about learning from game 1 to game 2, I feel like the offense was the same, which is still good, but there's still some areas that they can improve.
Yeah, there were definitely some runs by Athan in that game that I thought looked uncomfortable.
Right.
Where, it was almost like he kind of got caught not knowing where to go or what to do and kind of just, salvaged a couple yards out of it. But it didn't look fluid in how he was running the play. So I'm interested to see how much behind the scenes they're trying to clean that up. And just speaking of Athan, obviously, his accuracy is way up this year. I do think, and we talked about it last week too, a good part of that's attributed to the standout play of the tall receivers and Duff and Strong. You'd rather miss high than low anyway, even if you don't have tall receivers. But I think that, him putting it in the vicinity, the window, the catch radius for those receivers are, pretty high, and they're coming through for him. I am a little skeptical or maybe concerned's the wrong word, but I'm curious to see as they play better defenses, how much those 10-yard out routes are going to be there. Talking about, the soft coverage that they went against last week. And how much those defenses are going to try to dictate to them to be more of a run-first team, which we haven't seen them try to do yet. So I do think there's a lot more creativity and kind of balancing out, or maybe, I guess, keeping an ability to call plays to try to keep the defenses more off balance than they've done so far. Right. But in terms of your thoughts on Athan, there's some pretty, very optimistic thoughts out there about he's the best quarterback of all time in Rutgers history. I'm very happy with his first 2 games. I think that's way too early to anoint him that. But I guess, what are your thoughts on the ceiling for him this season so far and what you've seen through 2 games?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's certain things where, his accuracy is better. Most of the ones that are incomplete were either throwaways or there's a couple drops. It's not like he has as many of those kind of like hiccup throws that were obviously very common with Gavin, and he's not immune to it. The one thing, to your point, that we need to see is, we talked about this a year ago, where it seemed like when he was throwing those intermediate out routes, that sometimes it took the ball a long time to get there. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they were knocked away or intercepted. And that's really where a lot of his interceptions come from. If I remember right, he had one against UCLA like that. He had one basically in the game against Kansas State in the bowl game. There's at least one other one. I'm trying to remember which game it was, like on those exact routes. Now, he has improved in the sense that he's not throwing the ball harder, but it seems like he's trusting the timing more. So when the defensive backs are off and he knows they have a clean cut, in a sense, he's leading the receiver toward the sidelines better than he used to. He would wait longer for the guy to be open and throw it, like you see a lot of quarterbacks do. And he's doing a better job of throwing with anticipation, which really reduces your interceptions also, because then the defense has less time to react, less time to get tip balls, all of the above. But when the coverage is tighter, is he throwing those balls well enough that if there's contact at the catch point, is his receiver going to be able to make those plays? Or are they going to have to run shorter routes because he still doesn't have like a cannon on those throws? Now, I don't know why he seems to have more juice when he's throwing deeper than he does on those out routes, but they are pretty long. So yes, I'm just trying to expand on what you're saying as to why I'm not concerned, because I don't think he's going to throw like a bunch of pick sixes, but I do think it's going to become a less effective weapon if some of those get knocked down or they passes get broken up and you're in more 2nd and 10. In the past, Rutgers would be in 2nd and 7 but will they risk 2nd and 10 for some of those plays against like a team that's going to play much tighter press coverage like Iowa or not? That's what we're going to have to see over these next few games.
Yeah, well said. And that is kind of what I was alluding to with balance, is that, they're proving they can make that play consistently. Can they do it against better defenses? But also, can they keep them honest and get over the top, throw downfield? Can they, get those 3, 4, 5 yards rushing and first down, and be able to really keep things off balance? Wanted to ask you one more question before we get into Norfolk State a little bit. 2 weeks in a row now, Rutgers, multiple double-digit players on the injury list, both overall and in terms of players being out. Same thing happened last year. Luckily this year, less big-name impact players. Obviously, Eli Blue is a big loss, I think, for the defensive line. But overall, I guess, what are your thoughts on Rutgers now 2 years in a row coming out of training camp, having so many players on the injury report, either questionable or listed as out, and what kind of residual effect, even though it's not a lot of many starters at all, how much residual effect could that negatively impact this team as we get into the kind of the grind of the season in October?
I mean, it's really tough to say. I mean, like we've talked about before, they've been really, really fortunate with certain health. I mean, we talked about the last 2 years, they've had their starting quarterback take effectively every snap for entire season. So in that sense, they've been a little bit lucky. A running back that takes the number of carries that Kyle Monungai took is obviously destined to get hurt. I mean, unless they're, a freak of nature type of body guy, but even then they're going to get banged up. Maybe not, a cracked rib or whatever. And there might have been some cheap shots in there. Guys are punching under the pile. That's something that's a part of football, unfortunately. But I would venture to believe that Schiano saw this coming, and that's one of the reasons he made a change in his strength staff. And we talked a little bit about it on another podcast. I'm not really sure exactly what that means, but it's tough when you're trying to figure out like how much weight you want to put on guys, right? Because in effect, if they're heavier, you're going to have less of certain types of injuries and more of other types of injuries, but they also might have less like mass and protection from some of those like body blows, I guess. It's hard to say, but then you might have other injuries where a guy's heavy, he hurts his ankle, and then it's tougher to recover from a sprained ankle because they're heavier, right? So there's always a push-pull when it comes to this sort of thing. But yeah, it seems like Shannon was already ahead of this and realized like a change had to be made. They have to do something differently. In terms of just the injury report, that's really tough to say too, because it's impossible to compare side by side two different teams and say, well, is this team just putting every guy in there that has a paper cut, and this other team doesn't put anybody in there unless they're out for the year? So I really don't know, like this, if you're really comparing apples to apples when we compare them to other teams. When you look at Rutgers, I mean, Gilly's been out for a while. Fama has been out for the season for a while. You got two offensive linemen at left tackle, but then when you look at it that way, Holland Pierce started how many consecutive games? So like there might just be luck there. I'm not really sure. The only thing I will say is that the non-contact injuries and hitting more in practice, again, is a two-way, is a double. It's not a double-edged sword, but it's a give and take. You hit more in practice, just like guys who we used to talk about in baseball. The guys who are wrestlers wouldn't get hurt during baseball season. All those little injuries, muscle injuries, like they had kind of fought that out in wrestling, like I'm saying in like high school. And college is kind of similar. The guys who were doing a lot more of that combat stuff might not have they might have more likely to be hurt, but a lot of those little things they wouldn't get. And I don't know how much cumulative impact there is there. It's hard to say, but I would say it's concerning, and Rutgers seems to be trying to address the problem. So at least that's good. And again, like season enders, I'm not really sure how much you could do. Like the more you hit, it's not just going to mean less guys are going to get torn ACLs or torn Achilles, but it may mean less guys have like, a muscle strain on their like pec or something like that. So it's really, really hard to say. And I'm curious what the data will say about stuff like this in 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and it'll be just Dante Chin, going down in that game twice. Certainly a concern for the offensive line. We talked about that as a big key going into the season. with the offensive line staying healthy. So more to come there. Let's talk about Norfolk State here to wrap things up. Obviously, an opponent that Rutgers should overwhelm. Being a short week with Iowa coming to town the following Friday, obviously you want to see them take care of business early on. But anything you've watched on Norfolk State on tape that jumps out at you in terms of this matchup?
I mean, they're an interesting team that is kind of typical FCS, especially kind of in that HBCU mold where they got a lot of speed, but a lot of those guys might weigh only like a $165, right? So really what you want to see is a Rutgers guys that are 185, 190 pounds that are running just as fast, but bigger. When I look at the two games that the Norfolk State played in the first game against Towson was just out executing them from the beginning. They didn't show any sign of life until they took their quarterback, their first string quarterback out, Carter, and then they replaced him with Otto Kuhns, who's more of like a drop back passer. But don't be fooled. He's kind of like Art Sikowski, where if you let him run straight, he's actually pretty fast. But he's also more of like a guy who he can drop back and throw pretty well. So Rutgers is going to have to get pressure, or this game is going to not be over as quickly as everyone hopes. Their line is just not agile. Like similar, like they have a lot of big guys, but they're not very showing good lateral agility. So I've got, for those who are watching on YouTube, I've got my Eric O'Neill shirt on. I know I've been, really challenging him to be a good player. And last week I thought that he really was starting to step up in the second half with what Rutgers needed. They were double teaming him late in that second half. And I want to see someone like him just run right around the guys who are going to try to block him in this game. And if we get pressure, it'll be fine. Watch out for Norfolk State's offense to do a lot of like shallow crossers to try to take advantage of their speed, or kind of a lot of trick plays. They like flea flickers, reverses. They're going to try a lot of that stuff. They did that even against a team that wasn't as big and powerful as Rutgers. So that's what their offense brings to the table. They got some guys with some speed. They're going to try to get the ball down the field to Cameron Thomas, or Cam Thomas, they call him. They've got a couple other quick guys, and you got to watch out. One of the coolest highlights from their game last week was the announcer shouted when the running back was in the open field. He's like, he hits the B button after the running back did a step back, almost let a defender pass him, and then kept going. I don't know if they ruled it a touchdown because he got anywhere close to the line, but they've got some guys who are fast. And so that's actually good, because at least the Rutgers defense will have to, account for that. And obviously it's not the same as a Big Ten team in terms of speed and power, but they've got some fast guys that they're going to have to cover. And, hopefully they can learn something about the team heading into, like you said, teams like Washington and Oregon on that side of the ball. On the defensive side, the Norfolk State defense, they're just very undersized up front. They've got a couple real big guys or nose guards, like 330 pounds, but he's not very agile. And they were just getting blown off the ball against Towson and at times against Virginia State. So really, Rutgers, this would be a good game to establish the run, just prove that you can kind of shove them back and get what you want on the ground, because they do have some speed in the defensive backfield. Now, they don't have a lot of size, so I do think Duff and Strong could have a field day if it came down to it, if this was close for any reason. But, yeah, I mean, on offense, Rutgers should be able to get what they want. I mean, there's a couple guys who are nice players. Frisbee, Tariq Miles is a pretty good linebacker. They've got a lot of seniors and grad students in their defensive secondary. But, again, a lot of those guys are undersized. Really, it's better to just beat them up front and then, get some of those guys out to avoid further injury, while you also might get Giwa, Cesare, some valuable reps in case, they're ever pressed into duty.
Yeah, good stuff there for sure. Offensively, you mentioned Cameron Thomas. They also have 5'9" Drayshawn Kendrick, who leads them with 15 catches. Thomas is 6'1", 180. Kendrick is 5'9", 190.
That's an overstatement, having watched the film, but yeah. I don't think he's 5'9".
What do you think? He's taller?
Shorter.
Oh, shorter. Yeah. And then they have 4 receivers with at least a 20-plus yard catch. So that's something to watch, that they have multiple playmakers in that regard. Rushing the ball, modest numbers across the board. Kevon King leads them with 20 rushes, 95 yards. But they also have, it's interesting actually, they have three different players that have at least a 20-yard rush as well. So I think, this could be a little bit like in Miami, Ohio, where they might struggle to have consistency and move the chains consistently, but they do have some speed, like you mentioned, to be able to create some big plays. So it's going to be interesting. I think attitude-wise, you want to see Rutgers come out and take care of business right away, establish a big lead. I did think that Schiano probably left some guys in a little bit later than he needed to at the end of last game.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping this could be a first half type game for the A offense, in terms of being healthy and fresh for Iowa. If they're up 28, 31, whatever amount that they might be, it's a great opportunity for AJ Surace to get some time, to get the some of those younger receivers time. So It is an important game from a developmental standpoint, but I think in terms of the overall outlook of the season, take care of business as early and efficiently as you can and get out of there and get ready and start game planning for Iowa. How much do you think they're already, I know no one will ever admit this, but there's someone assigned to scouting Iowa right now.
Right. Advanced scouts. Right.
Yeah. Right. So, obviously they're not going to be talking to the players, but the coaching staff as a whole, right, is certainly starting to look at that game already, even if that's just Schiano talking to his scouts, right?
Yeah, and I mean, he's not as big as Gronowski, but Coons is a quarterback who will run, just like Iowa's quarterback will run. But he wants to sit back in the pocket. So with the fact that head coach Michael Vick is going with Coons as a starter, I think it's probably a good thing for Rutgers in that sense. Otherwise, they'd be preparing for the other quarterback who's more of a runner. And I don't know how many quarterbacks they'll face like that. I mean, Williams from the quarterback for Washington, for example, comes to mind. But I think Rutgers is going to face a lot more of these like drop back types, especially against Iowa. So, but that can run, right? You can't just not account for him in the run game. So that's a positive. But the bigger issue is just on the lines. I don't really think you're going to be able to simulate what Iowa's going to do to you. And that's why, to your point, I was trying to think about that last game. Why was he keeping some of those starters, especially on the offensive line, in for the last drive, maybe even last two drives?
Yeah.
Like, I would have thought you wanted to rotate somebody in, but my guess is their expectation was these guys are going to get better practice in the fourth quarter against Miami of Ohio, and it'll be more representative of the Big Ten opponents they're going to face than Norfolk State by the second quarter. Early in the game, they're going to have energy. They're going to have some fight, that maybe. But if it gets a quarter and a half, and I really don't expect Norfolk State should be able to score too many points. Like, they might get a couple big plays, but as long as Rutgers doesn't, just allow 60 and 80-yard touchdowns, I think they're going to slow them down. So if you have a pretty big lead, then maybe you start rotating guys, maybe not wholesale. I know a couple of people have made the point that it would be nice if Surace could get a series with more starters in the game to get a better feel for it. But also we've seen in the past with some Rutgers quarterbacks that the second stringer is so much more comfortable throwing to the guys who he's been practicing with that maybe it's going to be tough to say how you want to proceed, right? Do you want him throwing to, Ian Strong and KJ Duff because they're just huge? Or maybe guys who he has some more chemistry with? I'm not sure what he's going to be more comfortable with or what the play calls are going to be more comfortable with. So I'm curious how that's going to go, but you would kind of hope that he can play behind the first string offensive line, at least a series, so that he, is protected and kind of get a feel for that. So, I think because the first two games were a lot closer than we had hoped, it's a lot more pressure to get younger, like second stringers in there in this game that might have to get more snaps, that we might not really see a lot of third stringers or true freshmen get their first game action, because it's really more important that you have your two deep ready. And at certain positions, like you mentioned, wide receiver, like they haven't even gotten any snaps. Safety, linebacker, those guys haven't played at all. It's really just your running backs, defensive line, I guess, that have kind of tight ends maybe that have gotten some looks. So it's really, you're going to have to get your 2.5 deep with this game. And so I would expect the twos to be playing deep into the second half And only maybe at the very end would you see, again, guys who they're just trying to throw in for their first game action.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And just finishing off some of you said, just comparing Mark Gronowski, the quarterback from Iowa, to Otto Kuhns of Norfolk State. Kuhns is 6'3", 208, and Gronowski is 6'2", 235. So
right, he's a bigger, much bigger version, more physical runner. Yeah,
right. But I agree to your point though that they're in a similar profile overall. So that I think that does help a little bit in terms of preparation. Overall, Rutgers facing Norfolk State, looking to go 3-0 on Saturday, September 13th at SHI Stadium, 3:30 on the Big Ten Network. We'll be back next week to preview the much anticipated Iowa game. Knocking on wood, should be hopefully with an opportunity to go 4-0 and make a true statement. Once again, after last year, also 4-0 that Friday night against Washington. We'll talk more about that. David Anderson, thanks as always, and thank you for listening and watching once again here at the Scarlet Faithful podcast.